The exclusion of Ukraine and Zelensky from the Trump-Putin talks in Saudi Arabia reeks of old-world imperialist arrogance, the sort of great power horse trading that Europe supposedly left behind in the 19th century. And in a scene straight from a bygone era, two major powers dictating the fate of a smaller nation without even the courtesy of a seat at the table. Now, the excuse is that Trump says they're talking about peace, not war. The argument from Trump's administration that Ukraine is being consulted but not actually present at the negotiations is a patronizing absurdity. It echoes the kind of dismissive diplomacy seen at the Congress of Vienna in 1815 or Yalta in 1945, where the fates of smaller nations were sealed in grand halls while their actual representatives were nowhere in sight. The message to Kyiv is clear. The war, the bloodshed, Ukraine's sovereignty are secondary considerations in the broader game of geopolitical power broking between Washington and Moscow. And the language coming out of Trump's camp, if not Trump's backside, is condescending in the extreme. Marco Rubio speaking of sequencing issues rather than addressing Ukraine's total exclusion, while Waltz speaks vaguely of peace without explaining why the primary victim of the war isn't part of the negotiations. It's a stab in the back. Zelensky's outraged response is entirely predictable and justified, and he's repeatedly insisted that no peace deal without Ukraine at the table will ever be legitimate, a principle that should be obvious in any diplomatic process. Yet Trump's White House seems perfectly content to hand over swathes of Ukrainian territory as a precondition of the talks, effectively asking Zelensky to ratify his own national dismemberment. And then there's the naked resource grab. Trump's proposal that Ukraine hand over its rare earth minerals in exchange for a further US support. This isn't diplomacy, it's extortion. And Ukraine is being asked to cede land, territory, economic resources as the price of survival. If the reports are correct, the terms of this peace settlement are highly favourable to Russia. They acknowledge Putin's annexations and effectively reward his war of aggression. This has wider ramifications. Russia's given a free hand to continue its expansionist policies, a chilling prospect for Moldova, Georgia, and even parts of Eastern Europe. China is emboldened. If Ukraine can be carved up in a bilateral deal between two great powers, why shouldn't Beijing assume the same can be done with Taiwan? Europe is sidelined. The Trump administration has made it abundantly clear that US security commitments to Europe are no longer a given. The EU now faces the cold reality that it cannot rely on Washington to guarantee security against Russian aggression. Trump's motives for dealing with Putin directly are glaringly obvious. The US presidential election has taken place and has been successful for Trump, and Trump wants to brand himself as the peacemaker as soon as possible. He's got 100 days to do it, regardless of what that means for Ukraine's sovereignty. The fact that Trump's first call was to Putin, not Zelensky, underscores the reality that his sympathies lie with Moscow. Moreover, Trump's view that Ukraine was not a cause but a burden, and his administration's language about burden sharing is just a euphemism for disengagement. He sees the war not as a battle for democracy against autocracy, but as a costly inconvenience. John Major and others in Europe have been quick to point out what this means. Western unity is crumbling. Europe is now scrambling to react, with Macron hosting an emergency summit to formulate a response, but the reality is sinking in. Europe may soon have to defend itself without America. This is the price of Trump's success in the White House race. And all those individuals on the right who were yah-yahing for Trump, I hope they're grateful. I hope they're happy. Because this is the destruction. This is the moment at which the knife is wielded to carve up the world. It's a seismic shift in global power. If Trump follows through with this grand bargain, I hope he doesn't, it will mark the formal destruction of US-led Western unity. The West will no longer act as a bloc, but as competing national interests, with America retreating into transactionalism. What's happening in Saudi Arabia is a betrayal of Ukraine, a gift to Putin, a wake-up call for Europe. It's also a stark reminder that in Trump's world, sovereignty is negotiable, and smaller nations are merely pieces to be moved on a chessboard of great power interests. History will remember this moment as one in which a nuclear-armed superpower legitimized a war of conquest. and in doing so undermine the very international order that it once built. It's at this point that I think one can say with absolute certainty the principle of mutual deterrence has disappeared.